back to this edition of Fresh Outlook. We are talking about faith and a number of issues making the headlines this week. Among them, an awful rise of Islamophobia. If you've been following the news at all, you might realize that in some cities across America, and it has been proposed right here in the New York City area as well, that anti-Islam banners, posters, and the like should be put on subways and buses, basically painting Muslims with a very broad brush, saying the radicals who don't represent Islam at all over in the Middle East, namely the ISIS militants, are similar to the Muslims you'll find here in America. And I can tell you, as someone who works predominantly with Muslim people, that is very far from the truth. Let me introduce our panelists once again. We have Dr. Walter Wagner, who is a professor at Moravian Theological Seminary. We have Imam Shamsi Ali. He is with the Jamaican Muslim Community Center. And we have Donna Auston with us as well. And she is a PhD student at Rutgers University. Let me start with you, Imam, and talk to you a little bit about this subway campaign. What have you heard about it? What's your reaction to it?
I heard this from media, certainly, and it came to my mind directly that this is not America that I know. You know, as an immigrant, I came to this country basically, number one, to learn how to live in a tolerant environment. I wanted to enjoy freedom of religion. I wanted to be embraced by my fellow Americans. But when I encountered this kind of attitude, it saddened me. Possibly I would like to mention a personal story briefly.
Sure.
When I came to this country, I rented a house in Astoria, Queens. And my neighbor was an Irish Catholic. You know, every morning he went out from his house cleaning his driveway in hours. And I developed a kind of suspicion, what he wanted to show me. You know, because we had the kind of suspicion, maybe he wanted to convert us to the religion. But after months and years, he never talked about religion, and we became friends. My kids call them grandpa, grandma. That is what interfaith in the United States of America. To see this kind of advertisements against the Muslims is, it's really saddened me. Number one is a Muslim, and number one is an American. You know, this is what not my country is all about. This is not what my religion is all about.
Absolutely, and Donna and I were talking a little bit about this during the break, that the media is kind of a pawn in all of this, because these posters and banners might never get posted in New York City subway systems, but we're talking about it. We're getting that hateful message out there on some level, and that's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And interestingly enough, I think that, to take the Imam's point, that this is not the America that he knows, it's actually, sadly, it is the America that many of us know. I'm an African American as well, and there's a long history of, while we have ideals of tolerance, and at many times we're very good at kind of reaching and actualizing those ideas of tolerance, I think at the same time we had this long-standing tradition of xenophobia and racism. I mean, and certainly against people of color, but also against Catholics, you know, earlier in the U.S.'s history. So I mean, so I think it is, in some ways, it is. And
we've even seen a backlash against President Barack Obama that
Absolutely.
Many people think was racially based as well. Let's join our guest in D.C. We have Dawud Walid, who is the executive director of CARE-MI in Michigan. And Dawud, let me begin by asking you, what is your reaction to this awful re-emergence, if you will, of Islamophobia? I felt that had largely died down post 9/11. We were 13 years away from that awful date. And we saw a backlash immediately after 9/11 and the terror strikes, but it seems like we're seeing some backlashes here in the United States and around the world as well.
Well, according to Pew and Gallup polls, since 9/11, there's been a steady increase of Islamophobia. It's never gone down, and that's primarily due to a very well-organized, well-funded Islamophobia network. In fact, the Council on American Islamic Relations had put out a report last year showing that the major Islamophobic activists, in which Pam Geller is a part, and organizations have spent almost $120 million with the sole purpose of perpetuating Islamophobia, both with these types of ads that are being shown in New York, as well as lobbying and trying to introduce anti-Islam legislation in state legislatures. So it's really no surprise to me because there's multi-million-dollar cottage industry that is focused on fueling Islamophobia in America.
And Dawud, it seems to me that there also might be some political gain in this if the radical right here in the United States, ultra-conservatives, and some members of the Republican Party as well, seek to make political gains by creating an us and them mentality, saying, hey, look at what they're doing. They're not protecting us against this threat. So there's a lot of coded language going on right now, particularly with a major election taking place in just a matter of weeks from now.
Well, no doubt about we see the ginging up of this type of rhetoric during election cycles. And unfortunately, people on the far right have used Muslims as a whipping board in trying to paint Muslims in general, but in particular American Muslims, as being some sort of existential threat towards the American way of life. And we even see recent statements of Michelle Bachmann, who doesn't even talk about radicals overseas being a threat. She's saying Islam itself is a threat to the American way of life, and this is predominantly coming from Tea Party type Republicans.
Absolutely. Let's bring Dr. Wagner in on the conversation. I know part of your job is educating Christians and Christian leaders in the seminary about Muslim and the Muslim world. Tell me what you make of all this politicization and these people thriving and actually, as Dawud said, making a cottage industry out of Islamophobia.
I think, as Donna had indicated, it is quite American to have an enemy, which whoever that enemy might be, immigrant groups, racial groups, and much more so if fear can be brought into that. And the element of having fear as crucial so that people will begin to mobilize against groups. I received an email the other day from somebody I respect, a person that I know, of picture supposedly, maybe Imam Shamsi Ali can even indicate this, if it's true or not, on Madison Avenue, in New York City, that the street was blocked by rather fearsome-looking Muslim men at prayer and saying, it's coming, it's already here.
Let me just stop you there, Dr. Wagner. I'm going to turn to the Imam. I'm going to give you each 30 seconds and say, what do you see is the cure to all of this? How do we stop this rise in Islamophobia?
I think we have to build a goodwill to cure ourselves. We don't deny that Muslims must also develop a positive image by themselves before being viewed positively by others. But at the same time, I just came back from Indonesia and Malaysia, and Muslims in Indonesia and Malaysia, perceive Americans as those who are burning Quran, or those who are preventing Muslims from building the mosque. And I think as a person who is trying to build bridges of communication and understanding between the two, between Islam and America, I think it's difficult for me to convince them while they see this all in the media, that Americans are protecting the mosque, Americans are accusing Muslims.
So it's a two-way street, stop from misinformation.
Two-way street, yes.
Absolutely. Donna, what do you see as the cure?
I definitely think education and open conversation, open and continued conversation, and an effort to implement the ideals that we all are supposed to hold dear, both in our religious traditions and in our civic traditions. We need to be continuous, we need to be vigilant, and we need to be continuously and intentionally working towards more open dialogue and implementation of social justice.
Following the words of Fethullah Gulen, let's go to Dawud Walid in Washington, D.C. With just 30 seconds left, tell me what you think the cure is.
I agree with Dr. Auston 100%. I would say that Islamophobia is nothing but a branch on the tree of structural racism in America. We still as Americans cannot have a frank dialogue about racism and what's taking place to African Americans and Native Americans. Therefore, there's only a frank and candid discussion over time regarding the broader issue of structural racism in which we'll be able to get past Islamophobia and really make some gains in eradicating that branch which is on the tree of structural racism in America.
All right, Dawud Walid joining us from CARE in Michigan. Thank you so much for your time. Actually, in the nation's capital is where he's joining us from. When we come back here on Fresh Outlook, we're going to take a look at the connection between faith and environmentalism and why what is right for the planet is also good for your religion. After this.